Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on cybersecurity insights and 2026 priorities. My name is Nick Griffin. I am VP of Product Operations at Outpost 24, and I will be your moderator today. A couple notes for housekeeping before we get into it. We've got a great panel today. We're going to have a very good conversation around a few different topics, starting with cybersecurity trends that define 2025, moving into what organizations are focusing on in 2026, some practical experience and guidance from the industry. The talk is scheduled to go for about 60 minutes with Q&A at the end. We'll try and get to as many questions as we can throughout. There is a question mark tab on your screen that you can enter your questions into, and we'll review those as we have time towards the end. And lastly, a recording of the webinar will be available on demand for everyone who is registered for the session today. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. We have a number of my very knowledgeable colleagues with me today. Borja Rodriguez, the manager of our labs team and keeper of all things threat intelligence for us here at Outpost. John Stock, VP of Product Management. He's been around forever, but focuses today on our vulnerability management side of the house, but a wide range of knowledge. Marcelo Castro Escalada, Senior Product Manager for our exposure management side of the house, and Martin Jartelius, our Product Director for AI. So we won't linger too long. We'll get right into the discussion. We're going to be very conversational today, and we'll start by kind of looking backwards at 2025 and talking about what were the most defining cyber incidents of the year and what lessons can you learn from those incidents. Maybe Marcelo, you want to start us off?
Yes. Hi, Nick. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here and to have this talk with all of the members present. So 2025 was a very eventful year in terms of cybersecurity, right? But there were a couple of events that called out my attention, a lot. Basically, all of these have one thing in common, and it was the fact that all of the initial attack vectors were stolen or leaked credentials, right? So the case, for example, for DraftKings, sorry. It's a company based in the US, and it was massive. And the initial vector was that. Then there was account takeovers and so on. But again, it's not something that was extremely complicated or resourceful, etc. It was just using leak credentials to gain access and then do other stuff. The same thing happened with Jaguar and Land Rover. That was also massive, and it was in all the news and everywhere. And again, it was initial access through leaked credentials, stolen credentials, and then it was lateral movement and so on, right? So we're not talking here about very sophisticated threat actors. We're talking about actors that are gaining access to these leaked credentials. We're seeing millions and millions of leaked credentials. That's been growing a lot lately. So I think that's the main thing that we have seen in 2025. Of course, there's been other events that are not this type, but to me, it calls out the attention that apparently threat actors are trying to make it as easy as possible and as quickly as possible to gain access, and then they're going to start using other tactics and techniques.
If I can jump in, one of the most relevant things, I think, through 2025, it has been Scattered Spider. It's one group that has been well known for everyone because of the incidents on M&S, Scope, and so many more. And as Marcelo said, they are not really technical people. They are very young people. As we have seen, because there has been some people that were arrested and they were kids in some way, like between 16 and 20 years or so. So they are not really this kind of people that it's really techie guy, that it's, like in the garage of their home, learning how to exploit 0 days and so on. These people, what are they doing? It's studying the procedures of these companies, like searching for the weak link that it's, as always we say, it's people, and then like trying to use this kind of information to get in. And that's the main thing that I think that we have learned in some way during this year, because almost everything get around this kind of incidents.
Yeah, and also, it's getting easier and easier to gain access to these huge, massive, credential files that are, being spread through tons of, Telegram sites or channels, etc. So it's easier and easier for these threat actors to, start doing their thing. When a couple of years ago, or maybe 5 years ago, it was a lot more difficult. You needed a lot more technical skills in order to, do any kind of attack, right? Today, the information is available, really simple. And, so more and more of these kinds of events are happening, and we're expecting to be a lot more in 2026, right?
I was just going to also kind of related to that. So it's a bit of a side shoot in the regulation side, is because of all these breaches and all the information coming out from things like Spider, things like last year, GDPR, I was looking into how GDPR fines for 2025, 1.2 billion euros of fines were handed out in 1 year, which is quite a lot of money. The biggest fine handed out was actually in 2023, which was to TikTok, which was 1.3 billion from the Irish government on its own, which is pretty pricey. But 9 out of 10 of the fines handed out were for the big fines were for big tech companies, so social media companies who hold a lot of personal data. So any kind of GDPR breach or any breach includes that personal data, how they make money from us. But while it's not an exceptionally sized fine, it's not gone up. It's the number of breaches today, per day. So previously, it had always been below 400. Last year, they reported around 450 breaches. It was just under 450 breaches a day were being reported. It took a while to get my head around that. That's just in, the 450 organizations every single day were having to say, yeah, we've had a data breach. It could be they've leaked because they've sent a letter to a wrong place. That's still a data breach, but most of them are around technology. And it's just, the sheer volume of data that's being leaked out there. And a lot of these are because of the leaked credentials or the malware like Spider is the easy ways in. And it's just quite scary, the sheer numbers that are involved. There's too many zeros for my liking.
Yeah, and there's also no limit. Like there's no kind of ethical limit whatsoever, right? It used to be a while ago that there was, a reason behind. Maybe there were, I don't know, doing it for some kind of message, spreading some message, whatever. Today, it's like just ridiculous how it's only for the money, right? Last year, there was also this attack on a company called Keto International, and it's a nursery network, right? So it's like, and they, removed information about kids, very young kids, so it's like they don't care about anything. So yeah, it's really scary what's going on.
I think that's because, as I say, they very young people, they're very bold, I think, and I mean they don't care about these kind of things. Some of them, even, it's not only about the money, it's also because they will get a name, they will get famous, everyone will talk about them, and they don't care even to protect themselves. That's why some of them are being arrested. That's why. But I mean that's increasing a lot.
we're also seeing a lot of the trends we're seeing is based on what Marcelo said on following the money, more or less. So the breaches when we started seeing ransomware, that was because prior to that, hacking was either allowed, you disrupted somebody's operation, or you would steal information. The next problem was how would I make money from this? I needed to find somebody to sell it to. So you need to find a valid buyer for it. Ransomware found out that that person is you, because you would most likely like to retain access to your information. And this kept happening for some years, but luckily organizations learn and adapt. Insurance companies require a basic level of security and so on. And this led to the impact of a breach, so a large ransomware attack where people would encrypt all your data. Now, there were backups, and they didn't use the same admin credentials as your normal network, and all of a sudden they couldn't take away the data from you entirely anymore. Then comes what they call the double extortion. I encrypt your data, and I steal your data, and I threaten to give your data to everybody else, because I still can't sell it, but I can force you to pay money to not disclose it because it's sensitive. And this kept going now for some years, and large organizations, they have better and better breach monitoring. So the threat actors, they moved downscale to smaller organizations. They moved into areas they wouldn't touch due to ethical reasons like Medicare, healthcare. And they've also shifted and entirely skipped the need for the encryption element. So we've seen some of the breaches Marcelo was talking about here. They are targeting systems that contain information regarding an organization's customers or clients. They don't even encrypt it. Getting initial access to an information system, taking the data out and extorting based on it, because that is where the money is. And that means the main threat to an organization from these threat actors shifted from just unpatched servers. They're still extremely important. People target them all the time, but down to the credential, because your access to systems, which today may not even be on your network, it can be a cloud platform, it can be anything out there. Those matter. And that means that all of a sudden, multi-factor authentication, breach credentials, validating systems connecting to your networks and so on, that became the up-and-coming priority going forward to a large extent.
So, that might be a kind of a good segue into our next topic here. And, I think what's really interesting is how you guys talked about the attackers are focusing on the easy ways in. There are clearly things that people know about. There are things that maybe at the more mature sectors and more mature organizations within sectors have started to adapt to. But why are organizations still being kind of caught off guard by some of these threats? If this is how they're coming in, and how do you guys think that this might guide priorities as we head into 2026? Martin, that's kind of building on your point. I don't know if you want to start us off.
So one of the most important things is that as the modern organization no longer can be seen like a castle and wall doctrine, you have everybody on the outside and everybody I trust. We can see this changing, which is if you look to the last few years legislation, it's getting an increasing focus on third-party dependencies and supply chain. And in the same way, the fact that organizations to a smaller and smaller degree host their own systems, this means that knowing what systems we have running, where they are, and knowing where our organization is actually operating and storing all this sensitive information is becoming more important. So it may sound boring, but the system inventory, the information inventory, and centralized access management for all these platforms, that's becoming increasingly important.
And sorry, Martin, but also I agree with you 100%, but also I think there has to be, like an organized effort to produce a cybersecurity program. It doesn't have to be individual efforts like one-time pet test once a year, that kind of thing. Of course it's going to improve, but it's not going to be a full-on security program, right? So you have to look at it. I mean, this analogy has been used for millions of times, right? But it has to be like an onion, right? It's a lot of layers and different efforts. For example, teaching the people in your organization about cybersecurity, they have to be aware. There has to be awareness, but also, like you said, you have to have pretty clear what your exposed area is, even though you just can't rely only on taking care of the castle walls, like you mentioned, right? So it has to be a proper security program with somebody dedicated to designing that, right?
And I think that everything. It's a matter of trust, and we cannot trust anyone anymore in some way. I mean, the people is not learning. We have seen during the last year, everything is social engineering. Even if you have a strong password, they will steal it. Even if you have multi-factor authentication, they will use techniques like multi-factor authentication fatigue. I mean, they have their own ways. And there will be a lot of new technologies to try to stop that. For example, like new passkeys technologies to logging into platforms and so on. But you cannot trust the people. So the thing is that you have to stay aware. You have to be vigilant. And sometimes it's a matter of not only looking inside but also looking outside. So if you detect a possible credential because you are monitoring that and you are able to fix that before it's used, then you don't have to care at the same level of the security that you have inside your network, because you are stopping the first step to get in.
And I think a lot of the reason is security programs are wrong. Not wrong, they're following the wrong path. They're control centric rather than outcome centric. They're based on what controls you have rather than what the outcomes should be. So, I've got a good security program because I've got a lot of controls in place, not whether they detect the attack pass, not whether they interrupt that ransomware, not whether the fact that they can use that credential is now interrupted because they've regularly changed, or they change almost all the time, or I can control that blast radius. So, you've got a lot of organizations, they have their MFA, their backups and everything. Yeah, okay, great. But when you have a ransomware attack, you still have weeks and weeks of downtime. So yeah, security maturity just doesn't necessarily mean that they've got operational resilience. They're still floundering because it's not outcome centric. And I think that's kind of one of the big things why people get caught out, because we've got all the tools, we've got all the stuff, great. But what's the outcome if something happens? You've got protected, you've got backups, that's great. So what's the outcome that you need? I think that's something that needs to change. I'm seeing certain sways in some people I'm talking to, but generally it's still very controlled orientated rather than outcome.
Yeah, you can see the maturity there increase in some sectors, like we have the finance sector in Europe. They've applied the cyber framework, for example, which isn't so if we look at penetration tests, you start by defining I want to target this specific system, which is very relevant when you build a new system and you want to sell a product to other organizations. You take a good degree of responsibility for that product. But if you're trying to determine if your organization is at risk, the solution is not to run a pen test of a defined network range you have against the internet. It's to take on board someone who have the experience to look on who's the most reasonable threat actor targeting your organization. What would they do? Because we know how their tools, tactics, procedures, how those work. And then you emulate the attacker behavior. This way you can measure the efficiency of your controls instead of measuring patch cadence or anything like that. And this is going to be looking on anything from insider threats, if that's a problem for your business, or an initial account compromise, if that is a starting position where you know that these breaches are likely to happen. That allows organizations to test their assumptions, because usually a lot of security is based on looking at a theoretical risk, and you apply a mitigation of that theoretical risk, and then you guess how good you were at mitigating the risk. So unless you measure in a reasonable and realistic way, it's very hard to gauge the effectiveness of it. But yeah, if we look to our customer base, we know that organizations who work close to a more continuous threat exposure management way. So you start by not telling the tools and security program what you know about your organization. You use tooling and a structured way of working with this tooling to learn what you have, which you otherwise would miss. It can be anything from shadow IT to new domains or websites or products or cloud platforms popping up, which you're using. And based on that, you work with structured analysis of the risks, and you measure how you improve over time there. That is substantially better than trying to sit down in advance, decide this is where the hacker will strike, and this is how I secure that one system or platform.
Sometimes also it's not about the controls, it's also about detection. I mean, in the case of the attack of Scattered Spider against M&A, Scope, and so on, they were really affected by this kind of attack. But one of them, I think that it was Harrods, if I'm not wrong, they detected the breach really fast. So they were able to, to control that in that moment, and they were not that, like affected like the other ones that they have to close online shopping and so on. So if you detect the breach really fast, that's it. They don't care about how many tools you have to protect one server or one system or one network. If you detect that someone is getting inside, that's what matters.
I think the word that Borja, I think it was you who used it, was trust, and I think trust in the systems, trust in the theories of how people are going about setting up their security organization and things like that. But it all kind of ties into some of the most high impact attacks we've seen, and we talked about it a little bit just now, but the social engineering, the MFA fatigue, the help desk impersonation. Why is it that those kind of continue to be that dominant entry point, those identity-based attacks? And what do we see as the potential impact in the year ahead on how maybe organizations are addressing that, where they're starting to think about investing and changing their security programs, and how can we kind of guide organizations moving forward based on that trend?
I think that the main point in here is like we are not in a moment that everything is new, that there's new techniques, that we have to invent new ways to protect ourselves against what the bad guys are doing. They are doing the same things as they have been doing long time ago. We have been this kind of trend of professionalization, of the bad guys out there. That's something that it comes from 2020, more or less. I think that every analyst working in threat intelligence will say the same. We have been preparing for that, and we were telling always the same. I mean, they are getting more professional. They are doing or learning more about how to do these kind of things. They even hire other people to do things that they don't know how to do it. So we have, for example, in some cases, and not only in the cases of like M&S or Scattered Spider, the Kilo International, these kind of cases, that's something that it's really relevant for some companies, but there's others that are telling, okay, but what happens with critical infrastructure companies or people that it's really relevant, for example, for nation states. What we have seen during the last year is that these people, it's even hiding the people from the ransomware attacks, from other kind of professional attacks, because they are professionals. They know what are they doing. They even are really faster now deploying ransomware. I think that it was like Scattered Spider also. I talk about a lot of them, but they were in some way very successful last year. So they cutting the deployment to less than 24 hours, when in the past we have seen like 2-3 years ago, they get inside, they get the foothold in, then they waited for some months, they started to move around little by little, but that's not anymore. They get the access because they got a credential, they, I don't know, get an access through any I don't know, call or whatever, using social engineering, and then they deploy it really, really fast. And also, a new thing that we have been seeing is that nation states not only are hiring these people to affect these companies of critical infrastructure, important companies of finance in other countries, but also they are using that as a small screen. So they are using the ransomware attack. So the incident response teams and everyone is looking at that, and meanwhile they are stealing information. That also happened during the last year in some Asian nation state groups, that they were hiring people to steal information for other things. And one of the cases was the Jaguar Land Rover case. There's some analysis saying that there were people stealing information about building or blueprints about cars that were stolen in that case. So how this is affecting the companies, I think that if you are not aware of the situation currently, you are a bit late. So the first thing is that they start moving and looking outside, as we say. The thing of threat intelligence for the big companies, for the big banks, for the nation state governments or whatever, that's not anymore the thing right now. I mean, you have to look outside. You have to be aware of the kind of attacks that your neighbors are getting hit with, and then prepare in those cases, because the worst thing that it will happen is that you will have to shut down operations for weeks maybe, and that's money that you're losing. I think that for Emanes was 300 million pounds that they were losing on revenue, and they were like for the Jaguar Land Rover it was 50 each week that they were stopped, because they stopped the processes of building cars in that moment. The operational network was affected by the attack. So the thing is, don't trust anyone and be prepared. Look outside.
I like how you talk about the distraction technique there, because me and Martin have got a real world example of that when we were doing a red team exercise many years ago, where Martin was there creating fake LinkedIn profiles and everyone having a little chuckle about how ham-fisted it was. This is so obvious. That's definitely not the guy it's supposed to be. While the rest of us were there in some it was actually a KVM with default credentials, sucking down their Active Directory and a load of password files we were going to crack offline, and they never even noticed. And it was one of those, it was doing something so obvious and so loud to just go, here's a load of noise. It was like, what the heck is that? And then you're there like, yeah, okay, while you're looking over there, we're going to do this. It works really well. And it's amazing that was so long ago, yet it still works. I mean, that was very blatantly obvious.
And remember when they used to use for the same objective DDoS attacks? They would, attack with the DDoS and then go through the side door. It's always the same. Absolutely.
Yeah, I've done
it just evolves, a little bit.
As
done
I
that
say,
pen test and hired servers in Ukraine of all places now, but used to hire a couple of servers really cheap, like $5 for a day of 10 servers just to do what you want. You just go and you run up something like bees with machine guns or something, loads of virtual machines, throwing out a load of data. And then I'm like, no one's going to spot me doing something small. It's that, yeah.
yeah,
Make
there
loud
isn't
noise
anything
somewhere
new.
else.
It's the same techniques as always, and they are doing the same thing, but they are evolving, they are professionalizing in that way. They are also, for example, hiring, as I said, hiring people. I mean, if you know that there's someone that knows how to do this kind of attacks, why would you prepare? It's kind of like what we said about cloud and so on. The companies hiring other companies to do what they know, so you don't have to do it. That's the same case.
Yeah, we see the same specialization and commercialization. So we see groups who they trade with credentials. In some cases, it's hands-on, and usually Borja's team refer to them as initial access brokers. They will, for example, actually breach a VPN or know that they have access to this. We also have, is it the Traffer networks there, which it's more like a Netflix for hackers. You subscribe, and anything they can steal, they just upload, and everybody subscribing to their feed gets the credentials as they go. And these are like the least sophisticated. From there, you move to anything including criminal AI services for generating phishing emails, which are an increasing quality. If you look to, the last year, we can't really talk about last year, this year, without mentioning AI, machine learning, and the agentic approaches here. And that is going to have a large impact. On the attacker side, they, of course, have been early to tackle it. It's not going to be an AI-driven super malware. That's not what's going to happen. It's going to be the same thing as the software industry is doing successfully. And initially, this started off in what we call the unlimited interns opportunity. Essentially, AI gives you an unlimited supply of not that qualified staff to help you out. And when you remember what Borja talked about with the scattered spider group, with their spear phishing, they're retargeted for named individuals thereafter. These things are very likely to get automated. That is also why we could see this was a group of young people without lots of experience. That work can be automated. And that's where we're most likely are going to see it, not in a super malware, but in increased performance on the low to medium qualified work. We're also seeing it if you look to almost all organizations claiming to have an AI-driven security scanner. It's not going to be an AI-driven security scanner. It's going to be a bunch of open source tools kept together by glue and tape, and then an LLM running on top of it, which is aware of how to use the correct input and react to the results and take from the arsenal. And this is not going to mimic the behavior of a skilled hacker, but it is going to mimic the behavior of a penetration tester who runs a playbook and uses his standard tools for every engagement in a repeated and predictable manner. And there, the gain is not new insights for these neither tools nor platforms, but it is becoming more accessible and available to the attackers and the defenders when they're trying to use it in an offensive way to emulate attacks against their platforms, of course. So when it's held true that for a small organization, it's not that likely that somebody would spend a lot of time and effort trying to target them, the threshold just became substantially lower for going after that. And in the meanwhile, the lower security investment means they are lower hanging fruit, both when it comes to defenses and most likely detect and respond capabilities against, for example, ransomware. So that's most likely the SME segment is where we're going to see the highest impact, is my expectations at the moment.
So we kind of have bad actors using their old playbooks as technology evolves and continue to move forward. And AI is not only helping that, but allowing them to maybe expand their target base. You touched on it a little bit, Martin, on how organizations might, from a more remedial perspective, use AI defensively. But what are some of the ways that AI can be put in place by organizations to help them defend against this acceleration?
Yeah, so this again comes down to when we talk about AI, a lot of people are enthusiastic about AI, and I mean, I've heard it's like sex in high school. Everybody talks about it, but nobody does it. That's not really true anymore as such, but it's AI is a technology set. It's something that enables organizations to achieve many different things. You don't do AI, you can use LLMs to generate content. You can use them to predict, for example, input when you're doing coding. Similarly, if you would sit down as in a situation where you have unlimited staffing with relatively low skill, using this to, as Borja said, the detect and respond side, stating, for example, we note that John, who works out of UK, he just logged in from Singapore. He had never been there before. We are also quite aware that John were in UK earlier today. That is not good. We can also look and see that John is actually using SharePoint and he's reading lots of information from both the marketing team and the finance team. John has never done this before. This is problematic. So things that were hard to look at and draw conclusions from become within reach for organizations via AI very early. The downside of everybody wanting to do AI, even though they don't really know how to do AI properly, is that as a new technology becomes available to the industry, we tend to, by tradition, do the same errors every time when it comes to access control, where it comes to cramming it in where it's really not supposed to go. We can see it from when the web came around and everybody made a web interface for whatever they were doing, be it controlling a power plant or, back in the days, John and I found a power plant cooling system online. That's not a good thing. It shouldn't be online and really shouldn't have a web interface. I really should not be able to tune a wind power mill in Norway to give a different output on the electric grid where it was, but it had a web interface. I do not know why. They took it down when we told them. Now people are putting AI to be used for a range of different things, and this is already materialized in, for example, OWASP top 10 guidelines, both for LLMs and for agentic AI, and this also shows that for web applications, there's a top 10. For AI, there's several top 10s because it's a foundational technology. It's not a single problem. One of the cooler things we see now are agents. Essentially, AI being able to initially perform a task which would take you a few minutes of reasoning and working through it. The development platforms, they are now down to do a decent breakdown, hand the problem to the AI, and it will work independently for up to a few hours. And they've moved from unlimited interns to unlimited juniors when it comes to the more competent tools. But doing so, when we want to use these agents for things, and others who do not know how agentic AI works or how to do these things properly, they fall victim to, for example, what's called agency problems. Essentially, you give the AI access to lots of functions in an organization. Let's say that we want anybody to be able to read support documentation and get advices from that. And therefore, we set up an exposed prompt or an API, which is called from something a customer is using, and thereby they can control the input. That thing is able to read documents because it needs to be able to read documents to provide context to responses. If you're not careful, it can also delete documents. It can write documents. And these mistakes, I think we've done for pretty much every technology generation we've had. And for some reason, the business needs to learn it once more, that just because we're doing something in AI, we can't ignore the basic security concepts. If we look to MCP, so model context protocols, they expose a way for AI to, in a structured format, interact with and reason with external functions. And the initial versions, they didn't implement authentication because that was left to the API or function you were talking to, which means that in the last year, we've seen more than 10,000 new different projects using MCPs, and a range of them, they're not just binding to your local system, they're binding and listening to the network. A range of them you configure so they already connect to something and they have access and they act as a user or token, and that's not done in the session. And that means all of a sudden we put all the information we wanted the AI to have access to an open network port if somebody knows how to communicate with it. We haven't really seen the big and cool ones here yet, because the security community is still tinkering and learning as well. But I think this year will start to bring some really bad big whoopsies when it comes to the use of AI and the access you give it to information due to the lack of maturity.
I think that it's, as always, a matter of trust. The people is putting a lot of trust in the AI, even like trusting the AI that should defend my company and trusting the technologies that we're using to use AI. Anyone can try to bypass the system prompt to get whatever function they want, and it happened a lot of times in the time that we had LLMs working for us, and that's it. We don't have to trust either our people because they will get will get attacked by social engineering and so on. Also, we cannot trust in AI because we cannot trust in anything.
Yeah, we're in the position where we mature technology to a point where we now exposed it to be susceptible to social engineering. You can now make them lie to the machine to make it do things it didn't intend to.
Yeah, and we also have prompt injection, even in images, or web pages. So, and there's apparently no way to fix that yet. So you're giving access to the AI, to the internet, basically, go find me whatever, and here's my credit card, So how's that gonna, cause a problem, right?
Not only that, also, I mean, if you go like even farther, the people that it's training LLMs, that it's training any AI model, they are trusting the data. And this data, they are, I mean, gargantuan, like there's a lot of terabytes and terabytes of data. You cannot trust all this data. That's why we have seen in the past, like LLM models like the Google One Gemini using or paraphrasing Reddit users saying, kill yourself to solve the problem on your Windows. That's like, what are you doing? So there's people that there's attacks to poison these data sets to train the LLMs, and that's something that it can be a problem in the future.
Yeah.
One of the very similar to that is I was trying to work out, okay, I've got 50,000 vulnerabilities. Hey, tell me a remediation plan. That was a mistake. Constraints is the big thing, is when you're relying on an LLM to kind of make decisions for you. Not putting in constraints can literally just, yeah, you should turn this one off and pretty much burn it with fire because it's bad. It's like, or I could just run Windows Update. That'd have the same effect. Well, yeah, if you like, that's easier. It's one of those, you've got to put these constraints in. These machines have to be there. They have to be fixed. So unplugging them and throwing them out isn't an option. It may be to you, but it's not to me. So for me, the big usage when trying to actually, for the defensive side, is using AI to narrow the field of what you're trying to work on rather than actually choosing the solution. So just, these are the things to look at rather than, oh, this is the really drastic thing you have to do. So it's, yeah, putting those constraints in, otherwise it goes a bit loopy.
Anyway, I mean, we should, in context here now, we all come from a background of hacking and breaking things. Of course, that's the focus we have. AI is positive. AI used in the right way is for good. It's going to improve the amount of things we can get done when done right immensely. It's already doing very positive things, and the main thing where it's beating humans is, of course, in predictability, stability, the ability of doing a boring thing a billion times and land in a conclusion instead of getting bored halfway through. And I mean, it's going to do many good things. There's going to be problems. We're also seeing how use of AI positively in our platforms. It's helping with anything from, for example, we've had a situation where hackers, they are from all around the world. Every now and then we catch them talking about the customer's organization. We need to make that information available to the customers. We also need to make it digestible, understandable. They need to be able to decide if they're going to act on it. We see dark web discussions about customers. When we decide, should we go there and try wolf? It's very good. Imagine you have unlimited interns. Somebody should really read this information from the dark web before we tell the customer. And that means that this unlimited intern element here takes away a lot of noise. And the probability of the AI screwing some of these very basic human tasks up is very low. And there it essentially frees up humans to do qualified work. And that's going to be a game changer for security teams who can apply AI in a positive way to take away all the noisy, repetitive tasks.
Yeah. So it's a matter also of the prompt engineering in some way. The LLMs usually try to comply with whatever you said. Like there's people trying to use LLMs as if they were like psychologists, telling them my problems, and they will tell you that you are right, that everything it's like you said and everything. But the thing is that maybe we don't have to tell to them in that way, like saying, okay, do you think that this is bad? They will say, oh, yeah, it's really bad. But maybe you can ask in a way like, tell me, what do you think about this conversation in that web? Then they will do this kind of conclusion so you can read it and make a decision later.
Great. Well, thank you guys. We're going to shift over to Q&A and let us go a little bit longer because we're already tackling some of the questions that have come in that AI conversation. So that was great. As a reminder, there's the question mark on your browser. So if you have additional questions, feel free to enter them now. To kind of get us started, and we'll keep in the AI thread. At this point, do we see the speed at which AI is coming in on the attacker side as the biggest problem that organizations are going to face in 2026?
I mean, it's... Yeah.
Go ahead. No, please jump in.
Sorry, I was going to say, the advantage of being unethical is that you do not need to care about how you process customers' data or any other information. That means, and you also, if things break, it's not a disaster for an attacker, and that means they, of course, can apply AI more carelessly and experimental than many defensive organizations have to do. But the main problem with AI, I mean, attackers will use it for bad, but what they're doing is just usual use cases. Same thing like software is software, regardless if it's there to ensure that nothing malicious runs in my system by inspecting all the files running there, or if it's evil by inspecting all the files and stealing my information. It's essentially very similar. It's the same thing with AI. Of course, it can be used for bad. And it's going to be used for bad. And it's going to challenge many things, especially around the identity. If it's spear phishing is becoming more prolific, if we see deep fakes used to social engineer the service desk, the AI may lead to a muddled concept of identity in the security space. In our end, we're going after that by the zero trust approach. So we're going after validating both user and device in those cases, because we can no longer trust the user. And when we talk about multi-factor, it's usually like something you have, something you know, something you are. And if that is becoming insufficient, we need other means. And the password, I mean, we would love to say the password is dead, but it's not. We see billions of them every day. But the thing there is that how we do identity and validation, that would most likely change fundamentally due to the use of AI in the attacker end, because we will not be able to keep them away. And this also boils down to, if we were in a manufacturing industry, if I were running a factory, and you go around and you poke your arm where it shouldn't go in a machine and you lose your arm, I'm most likely getting sued if I own that factory, because it shouldn't happen. Employees should be protected. If you pick up the phone and you help John restore his account, as you're expected to do because you're working the service desk and you should help keep John working, and that's not John, that is Borja, and Borja is now on the inside in the network, then you were at error, according to how we usually see security today. And if we as a security organization lean back and say we are happy with stating the user is at fault, we can't fix the user, people are stupid. I mean, had we done that in other areas, yeah, you really shouldn't have put your arm there. This is clearly your fault, but it's not. And we need to cover for that. And when it comes to the AI elements here, as mentioned prior, if we apply them to see, well, John has never behaved in this way before, then it's good use of it. And it's going to be an arms race. We say the same thing when it comes to drones in Ukraine or whatever. As soon as somebody has a great new idea, the defenders need to have an equally good or better idea to keep up with it. And it's going to be an arms race like anything else.
I think for me, the big thing is that especially on the attacker side, is it only works because of the pre-existing weaknesses, right? The AI attacks or AI energized, there's pre-existing weaknesses. Like, I can go out and create an email in Swedish, a bit of cultural familiarity here in Sweden, that could convince Martin I was a Swedish speaker, almost. I could have the technical depth or fake the technical depth. Borja and Marcelo would be like, yeah, this can't be John, because this must be this person we're talking to who's got a really in-depth technical knowledge. I can, I've written malware using AI, and as an example of bad stuff, but also written proof of concepts and prototypes with no language skills, no idea how to write a CSS file, but can create a beautiful web page. So yeah, it's that ability for the attacker to scale their skill set without the skills. So they can scale what they're able to do without actually having the skills to do it. So like the phishing goes from, oh, that's obviously a phishing attack, to, is it a phishing attack? I'm not quite sure. Recon that takes weeks would now just take minutes. And, like you say, with Scattered Spider, people who are kids and junior, not going to say kids, let's just ask which one, younger people with limited skill sets and experience are now able to do, really technically competent things that they wouldn't have been able to do before. Not because AI has created new vulnerabilities or new risks, because AI has just enabled them to have a skill set one step above. The problems already exist.
The thing is that also I think that it's, as Martin said, in the defender side, it's accelerating things. It's helping us to process a lot of data in a small time. But the thing is that that's also true for them. They can analyze LinkedIn profiles. They can analyze a lot of data out there that it's public, then imitate someone's behavior and language and everything. And also there's something that I think that it may come new in some way. That's right now there's a lot of people talking about pipe coding and, like people that doesn't know how to code using these kind of things. And that it can be really bad, not only on our side, like machine learning, adding vulnerabilities in the code, but also there's tools like Gravity from Google or in Cloud that you can ask for a mock-up for a web page and it's built in a second. Then you can ask for a phishing site that it's done in a minute. Like if you are in a conversation with someone, you have seen the intranet portal in that moment, then you can have a phishing site in that same moment. You don't have to, like in the past, get in the intranet, then read the portal, download it, copy it, upload it, all these kind of things that you will need maybe 1 or 2 days, you can do it in the same moment.
Yeah, the
I guess
counterpart of
sorry.
that, of course, is that we have the, for example, when we looked at our AppSec services where we are working with web application hacking and so on, it's most organizations should have their own ethical hacker to help test it. All can't. And we have programs where we work very close with customers over time and work with this. Similarly, we have a managed service team. They run our tools, they review the results, and based on that, they give competent advice to customers. And that, of course, is something we are starting to use to work with them to make this available, but driven by the machines and technology systems to do similar qualified analysis and recommendations. As Jan said prior, you can't toss it 50,000 vulnerabilities, but you can show AI the process of breaking down, for example, trends like these systems are never getting patched, these other systems they are, and therefore you have organizational flaws leading to the repeated problems you have. And that is something well fit for machine learning and AI as a problem. And that means organizations who do not have a vulnerability management specialist, which is sadly most of them, they can start to act informed and advised without needing to bring out in external competence based on good people training AI to behave like skilled people.
All right, great. So we are getting close to time. There's a couple more questions in the queue, but we'll have to respond to those after the fact. First, just a thank you to our presenters and our panelists for taking part today. And thank you to everybody for joining us. As mentioned at the top, there will be an on-demand version of this webinar made available to all of our registrants. And we appreciate your time today. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye.